I am the famous fool of the village. Of course, that's what the ignorant say. Those who know call me the guardian of the village. Even funnier, my grandpa says I am a millennial prodigy with a red fate. The red fate means that I will rise to prominence through women. To put it bluntly, it means I am a millennial kept man. Actually, it's not a bad thing, but I never expected that. The woman I need to rely on, she isn't human. On my 3rd birthday, I even had to choose a bride in the graveyard. It all started on the day I was born. I was born in a small village at the foot of Champai Mountain. That day, in the middle of a bright afternoon, it suddenly turned as dark as midnight. The entire village was plunged into darkness. The villagers were so frightened that after screaming, they all lit kerosene lamps in their homes. It barely illuminated the village, but the village under the dim light of the oil lamps appeared even more eerie. This sudden abnormality scared the villagers so much that they were preparing to find the village chief, the backbone of the village, to ask what was going on. It's so strange. How could it be so dark in broad daylight? But as soon as the villagers stepped out, they found that under the yellow light of every household, shadows were flickering. There were many of them. And these shadows looked like humans, but not quite. They had long tails and seemed to have pointed ears, but they stood upright. They vaguely had a human shape. These unknown shadows were running all over the roofs, walls, and paths. They seemed to be in a hurry. All of them were heading toward an old house on the edge of the village. The villagers didn't dare to run around. They all hid in their homes, doors tightly shut, not daring to step out, silently listening to the footsteps on the roof. Thump, 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 thump. It didn't seem to stop for a long time. Some timid women were already crying out of fear. And these shadows were heading toward my family's small, dilapidated courtyard, where my mother was in labor, sweating all over and screaming in pain. The whole family's attention was on my mother. Even my father and grandfather outside the door were staring intently at the closed door, totally unaware. At this moment, the dilapidated mud wall was already crowded with shadows. The wall was swaying, barely able to support the weight of these things. Finally, sharp, rhythmic cries sounded around. These cries were very sharp and rhythmic, sounding like a child's laugh. But listening closely, it didn't seem like that. It sounded like some kind of animal. This startled my grandfather and father in the yard, making them look toward the yard. What they saw made my father stumble backward in shock, almost falling to the ground. In front of them was a scene he never expected. On the 4-foot-high mud wall, there was a whole row of white, furry things, standing there like humans. But because every household lit kerosene lamps, the light was dim, and they stood backlit, only the yellowish white fur could be seen. It was impossible to see what these things were. My father shouted, "What are these things?" Saying this, he was about to find a shovel in the yard. But my grandfather, seeing this scene, cheerfully stopped him. "Yin sun rises, earth immortals arrive, there must be a scholar father in the house." My grandfather wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he excitedly told my father, "This is an earth immortal's wedding party. Quick, before my grandson is born, entertain the honored guests well. Kill the chickens in the yard without draining the blood, and bring out the good wine I have hidden in the south room." My father was puzzled. The mud walls could barely bear the weight of these things, swaying and about to collapse. Finally, a series of cries erupted around us. The cries were very sharp and rhythmic, sounding like a child laughing. But on closer listening, it didn't seem like that. It sounded like some kind of animal. This startled my grandfather and father in the yard, making them look toward the yard. What they saw made my father stumble backward in shock. He almost fell to the ground. What he saw was something he had never expected. On the 4-foot-high mud wall stood a whole row of white, furry things. They stood there like humans. But because every household had lit kerosene lamps, the light was dim, and they stood backlit, only the yellowish white fur could be seen. It was impossible to tell what these things were. My father shouted, "What are these things?" Saying this, he was about to find a shovel in the yard. But my grandfather, seeing this scene, cheerfully stopped him. "Yin sun rises, earth immortals arrive, there must be a scholar father in the house." My grandfather wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he excitedly told my father, "This is an earth immortal's wedding party. Quick, before my grandson is born, entertain the honored guests well. Kill the chickens in the yard without draining the blood, and bring out the good wine I have hidden in the south room." My father was puzzled. He didn't know what these Yin sun earth immortals were, but he remembered that my grandfather liked to tell fortunes and read feng shui. So he didn't argue further. He didn't know what these Yin sun earth immortals were, but he remembered that my grandfather liked to tell fortunes and read feng shui. They looked fearfully at the thing standing on the wall, and reluctantly headed towards the chicken coop. Then, picking up a sickle, he chopped at a chicken's head. Squawk! Cluck cluck! The decapitated rooster instantly flew up, its wings flapping wildly, flailing in every direction, but without its head. It blindly crashed everywhere, spraying chicken blood on the walls, the ground, everywhere. My father frowned at the bloodstains. He felt a vague discomfort. My grandfather's urging voice sounded again. "What are you doing?" A grown man hesitating over killing a chicken, "Kill them all," scolded by my grandfather. My father gritted his teeth, grabbed another chicken, and chopped down again. Thud! Another chicken head fell. Another headless chicken flew wildly around the yard. While my father killed the chickens, my grandfather excitedly paced back and forth at the door, covered in feathers, not caring at all. He kept muttering, "Our Han family is finally going to have an extraordinary talent." My father, covered in chicken blood and feathers. Finally, he killed all the chickens in the coop. "The wine! Hurry up! Our family is going to have a millennial prodigy. Don't delay!" Hearing my grandfather's voice, my father had to drop the sickle and ran into my grandfather's room. He quickly ran out holding a wine jar. But as soon as he came out, he was stunned again. The yard, which was just full of blood and headless chickens flying around, was now empty. Only the floating feathers in the air proved that there had indeed been chickens just now. My father was very confused. In the blink of an eye, a dozen chickens had disappeared. That was enough for many meals. Even if they were gone, where did the blood go? While he was in a daze, My father got a kick in the butt. Go pour wine for the immortals. Don't you know how to host leaders? My grandfather urged again. Host how? Should I get wine cups? My grandfather scolded. Pour it on the 4 walls. My father had to approach the wall again, where the Whiteford things were still standing. As he got closer, the scene gradually became clearer. When he finally got a clear look at the thing, his hair stood on end. The closest Whiteford thing revealed a human face up close. My father fell to the ground in fright, scrambling backward. A ghost! A ghost! As soon as he said that, the human face started to move. The next second, the human face turned into a shark-faced, monkey-like creature. Screech! Cluck, cluck! The creature let out a piercing scream. Then the creepy childlike laughter quickly sounded again. My father crawled and rolled away in terror, spilling a lot of the wine. Dad! Dad! What kind of leader is this? Seeing this, my grandfather's face changed. He rushed forward and grabbed the wine jar. Yes. He didn't care about my father's screams. He grabbed the wine jar, then respectfully shouted to the one on the wall. My son doesn't know etiquette and disturbed the immortals. I hope you'll forgive him for the sake of my grandson. How could an unborn child have any influence? My father didn't understand at all. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the Whiteford creatures that had been agitated suddenly quieted down, making no more noise. And at that moment, the sound of a baby crying came from inside the house. While, at the same time, thunder roared over the back mountain of the village. 10 bolts of lightning struck a lonely grave.